Now I'm not. Now I'm live again. All right, let's test this thing out. Nope, now I'm not live. Let's see. There's testing out a teapot. See if this works. Nope. It's playing. I'm live. It says it's live, but it's not playing on the screen. Can you see it? You're not even able to hear me. It is interesting. Well, for some reason, Google Chrome is doing something weird about or rather Twitch. Like whenever I push anything, the only way I can get the stream to actually show up on my screen is to continuously erase the cookies off my Chrome every single time. And it's got to be a setting that's causing that, because I can't see what's being broadcast at all. Now it says 2000 network error, and it's not even showing that. I still got 4 more minutes until I have to broadcast. Let's see what we can do here. Well, I'm glad. It should be fine, but the problem is if I can't see what's going on the screen. Like right now, it says 2000 network error. It's not that. It's something else. Because I was using, and I don't have anything but Google set up right now. For some reason, I've got to delete the. I wonder what's the. It must be the fact that. Let me see here. Prediction. Send they do not track. Use a web service 10%. This may be it. Allow sites to save and read cookies. Keep loaded data onto you. Click the down. Third-party cookies. Prevent third-party websites from saving. Yeah, that might be it. Allow. Here we go. There. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that's the problem. It's way too clean of a Windows 10. Yep, there it goes. Yep, there it goes. Yep, there it goes. Yep, there it goes. Now it's on a loop. Yep, there it goes. Now it's on a loop. Yep, there it goes. Now it's on a loop. Yep, there it goes. Now it's on a loop. All right, third time's the charm. All right, now we got it. And with 1 minute to spare, I figured it out. Ladies and gentlemen. Oh, man. All right. So we're going to scrap what we did last time. Let's load back up the tree that we had to begin with. as we have found ways of improving said tree. We'll go into our folder and bring this up. File import tree. Let's see. I believe this was what we worked on at one point. Dwarf house. Incoming file. So this is what we had to begin. This is a tree house that I did that we were kind of keeping the same look and feel to it. And then we went in and did the forest cluster, which goes from this to this, and we still may look to get use some of these trees here, but they're a little bit problematic because they just have a lot of unnecessary tooling involved. And quite honestly, I think that when it comes to modeling, it should be nice and easy and nothing too difficult. So, we're changing things up a bit. We're going to make a new file. We're going to make it, title it cluster 3. We're deleting all this. So basically, we don't need that anymore. What we're going to do is start off with a simple box. We want to turn on our snap so that we are going to use our grid points to make an actual dedicated shape this time. If we want to, we can go over here and do like a box here, and then we'll start at the origin part. This is 0, 0 when it comes to geography, or geometry rather. Let me see here. One moment. I want to get this updated. Stand by. So basically what we're going to do is make just a simple box. We can hold down Control, and that will keep us uniformed on the size that we need. It's going to be just a cube for now, but we're just basically wanting to make sure it's centered because we're going to change it later. We just need to get something out there. Let's turn our points to this. This is going to be just one segment. We're going to basically make one segment of the tree, and then we're just going to duplicate it in a big circle and then scale it as we go farther up. So basically what we're going to do is this. Add LE poly. We're going to elongate it just a tad bit. And we're going to put a connection, a little slice down the middle, vertical wise. So it comes in 2 pieces. So you have 2 segments here. And then we're going to make another one, but this time it's going to be horizontal. So we make a little, looks like a house. It looks like a house's window with window panes. Just like that. We're going to work on bringing this up a little bit. we can switch over to perspective view so we can actually see what we're doing from an angle. Going to bring out the front. F3 brings it to wireframe so you can actually see what you're doing here. And I'll show you what the final product is. That way we can use as a go-by. I've actually already had most of the tree built. We may just skip to it, but I wanted to actually show what we're finally doing here. We're going to import a tree that I was working on earlier. And what this does is we're going to basically be making essentially this piece right down here. And then once we make that piece, then we can array it and move it around. And the nice thing is it makes a lot better looking tree than it was to begin with. You can still make some randomness to it to break it up so it's not so uniform like it is right now. But that's essentially what we're trying to do here. And how we're going to do that, we are going to deselect on your panel here. We're going to detach up here in the upper right hand corner, right here, and that will detach that little selected area from the whole piece. We'll delete it so that we just have this piece here. So now that we have this piece, you can just see what it is. It's literally just a half shell of a box with one of its pointed ends turned up. So in this case, you see it's paper thin. You don't need any thickness because it's going to be copied side to side, edge to edge. So it'll become a full object once we multiply it. So on our previous object here, you can get rid of essentially that. So now you can see it's a general idea. We switch back to front view, F for front. Pretty simple. So we can see it from this vantage point. And basically, we're just going to kind of generally get the desired shape by bringing it down. Looks kind of like a shield. To get it in that general area. Notice that there are these triangles here where this little piece here jets out. And right now we don't have that. So what happens here is we need to fuse. So basically you can see with it when I turn into wireframe mode, you've got this horizontal piece right here. They need to go down to these two pieces. These two vertices is what we call them. They need to be fused. These two pieces need to be fused. And that way we can get that more diamond pattern to begin with. And we'll slice right between them after we've got them fused together to give this little horizontal line too. But for right now, we need to use target weld, which is over here on your right. It's underneath in this mass modifier panel right here. And what that does when you actually click it, it allows you to drag any vertice on top of another vertice and it will automatically weld the two together. And that way you will have essentially one piece. So in this regard, we just drag right over there. Make sure a cursor is visible, and then you'll know when you can actually let go of the mouse when it goes from a mouse cursor to a crosshair. When it's a crosshair, you can let go. Until then, just keep the finger down on the mouse, and we have that like so. Now we're getting a little bit closer to that piece. And again, it's real vital to make sure that we get, and that's why I suggested to begin with to use a snap tool, which is up here. Right click it to bring up the settings and make sure that grid point is checked. We don't have it now, but at the time we had it checked. And that way you have a nice, you're made sure that this distance from here to here is nice and even. Because when it comes to copying and pasting, we're going to use what's called an array tool, which is essentially just arraying it around a central point. And they have to be basically the same shape. Otherwise, you'll get little gaps between the two. So if I move this thing over just a tad bit over here off that grid, then when it arrays, this left edge here, basically when you copy this over like this, you're going to have this other piece that is the right distance, but this one's going to come short, so you're going to have these weird overlapping. Because one side from the central point is longer than from this central point to the right side. It doesn't match up. So we want to make sure, Control Z to back up. We want to make sure that that's nice and even on the sides. Now I told you that we were going to slice this thing in half. And what we're going to do is basically, we can do one of two ways. But the easiest way for this is to select your model. Go over to your modified panel right over here. And go down to, you can either do vertices or edge or polygon, doesn't matter. Because they're all going to have the same tool. And we're looking right here to the right of it. There's going to be a word cut. It doesn't matter what you have it on. Cut is available on all sub objects. Select cut. And that does exactly what we think it's going to do. It's going to just basically make a cut line depending on where we tell it to. And generally I like to use a cut tool with snap on, which you hit S to turn the snaps on. And that is because you want to make sure that it is right on the corner here. Otherwise, you may make if you put it anywhere off that, it will make a cut exactly where you have the cursor. So you want to make sure that it is on, snap is on, and then that little yellow box pops up. That way you know it's there. We can either go from the middle here, just make sure that dotted line is appearing, and then make your connection. Right click to deselect. After you make the cut, you still have the cut tool selected in the upper right hand corner here. It's still blue, so you can still do cutting, but it's nice to be able to hit that right click one time, and that ends that cut segment, that little action, so that you can proceed on to the next motion. And that way you don't accidentally make weird slices all the way through this thing. So again, when you cut on, cut from the middle, outward, and we've got essentially a piece there. When you use the cut tool, it's important to go back, turn off the cut tool by pushing the same button that you push so it's not blue anymore, but to go over to vertice, or vertex in this case, in the sub-object menu right here. The reason is because you want to go back over and make sure the vertices that you actually cut have a tendency of making two vertices on top of each other. Now, looking at this, I have what looks to be 3 vertices selected. And that's not necessarily the case, because there's sometimes vertices that can be on top of one another. It doesn't look like it, but they're so taking the place. It's the same exact spot, and it's impossible to tell unless we go over to here, again, the main panel over here that we use frequently. We just keep referring to this right panel. We're looking right around here. It says vertex 8 selected. This will always tell you right here whether you have a single vertex or multiple vertices selected. Right now it says vertex number 8 selected. We only have one. If we select the one on the right, it says vertex 1 selected. One on the left, vertex 6 selected. We know we've confirmed that it has only individual vertices. If we select all three of them, it'll actually say here, though, well, we actually selected this one on the top. So we have 4 vertices selected right here. It's just good practice to make sure that you don't have multiple vertices taking on the same spot. Otherwise, when you go in and add a smoothing option, when we make it nice and smooth, it will peel those 2 vertices apart, and you'll have a hole where it shouldn't be. So it's always good to weld those vertices and make sure that you don't have any. If it was where it was 2 vertices selected, let's for instance say this section right here that I've got picked, let's say it was 2 vertices. You simply go down just below where it says vertex 1 selected, and there's a weld button. You just click that, and it'll be welded. That's all there is to it. All right, simple enough on that piece. We need to now go to the profile. So we need to go L for left, because we're going to do a side view. And basically we're just trying to look and see, make sure that we've got some kind of a closeness in this elevation. So this vertex right here, these 2 here, are the side pieces. They need to be about right there, which is fine. But this piece, this little section here, needs to come back a little bit. This piece here is this. Just need to basically, you're just mimicking it, just make it come up a little bit. Select both of those, bring it around. Just kind of move it around like that. We're not looking to be exact, we're just kind of getting the ballpark of it. Remember from last time, on Saturday we were talking that the key rule on overhang when it comes to 3D printing is a 45-degree angle, no lower than a 45, so nothing like this, because the support of it going layer by layer by layer cannot support that kind of overhang. It'll fall down, or it'll automatically put some supports underneath it, which we don't want to do if we can. So we want to make sure that we have above a 45-degree angle, and in this regard it really doesn't matter. It's a tree. It's not that big of a deal. Alright, so we got our piece down. We go back F to hit, so we actually see the width of it and see that it's a little bit wider than we want to. So let's take these 2 vertices on either side, go up here to the top where you have a scale button. It says box within a box. And instead of using any of these crazy axes, we're going to go just the X, so make sure that's illuminated yellow, and bring it in. Again, you see that it's kind of a shield pattern, and this is more squared off. We want to make sure that the distance between these 2 are always uniformed, because again, what we talked about earlier with the ray tool. So we just keeping that scale and using the X, bring it back out. And if we really want to, we can bring this down a little bit. Not by much, but just a tad. Hit P to go to perspective view so we can actually see from a rotating perspective. And last thing, just to bring this out a little bit. And now you can see basically what we were starting out. That's what we're kind of getting after. Okay. Now, let's get rid of that. We're just going to work on this piece now and just actually start building the tree from this piece alone. This will be a lot easier to build. Now, back hitting T for top, when we go to the top view, in order to array the way we're going to be doing it, think of it like when you're lathing a piece of wood in a lathe machine and it goes around a central point. Well, its key in this area is to always make your axis, this is your anchor point for this model we selected, to be at 0 at your origin. We can right click the move tool up here just to see that it's 0, 0, 0. We are at the dead center origin of our screen. That's important because when the array tool kicks in, it's going to start putting things at increments around that central point. And we want it to be so that we can have enough pieces that it just completely makes a nice rounded area. However, one thing we want to do to begin with is determine kind of how large in diameter we want this tree to be. And again, we're not worrying about the scale yet because we'll scale that down in general later. But for now, we still need to kind of have a centralized size. So in order to do that, I'm going to go and aim for a 6-sided tree to begin with. Again, it sounds like it's not that many sides of trees, but in this regard, you'll understand once we get going, you'll understand why I'm just going to pick 6. You can pick 8, you can pick 12, it's whatever you want. We're going to make a spline. It's over here in the modify panel. You've got the second icon over, this little icon here, it'll say the word shapes. You click on that, and that brings up what is called the splines. Splines are basically just lines. They're not physical geometry of any kind. It's just straight lines that you can create and manipulate in any way you want. So for me, I'm going to use this n-gon right here, fourth from the top on the left side, because it allows me to determine how many sides of a shape I want to make to begin with. Now, I said you can make lines, but you could also make shapes that are made from lines. Essentially, I want a hexagon, so 6-sided. Again, I want to turn on my snaps. Right-click the snaps up here where the 3 is. Turn on your grid points by selecting that, because we're going to want to snap to your origin. Close out on that, and now we've got our little snap yellow cursor that's popped up. It's looking good now. Make sure that you're at the origin, and we're going to pull away. And again, it's basically just determining a general good size of what we want our bottom part of the tree to be. This is not going to be the top of the middle or whatever. This is basically the first layer of branches of the leaves or the needles and things like that. So we're just going to pick one roughly close to the same size as what our piece is already. Something like that, because we're going to rescale it here in a second. So this is basically just our general area, and we will reference this later, but for now we're just going to keep this as it is. With our snap still on, we can move this over, and it will snap to the middle section of that hexagon. And again, it's all about keeping everything nice and uniform to begin with, or the array tool is just not going to work. It's just going to be completely screwed up. But you see now our anchor point is off-centered. It's away from the origin. So go back up to our panel here, because this is where pretty much everything in Max operates. This time it's the very top row. We're looking for the hierarchy, which is the middle button. Going to go down to Effect Pivot Only, and instead of Center to Object, we can align to World. Yeah, you can do either one. But at this point, once we have this thing Effect Pivot Only, we're actually going to tell it to go to the origin. So right-click your Select and Move tool up here, and you'll see that it's off-centered. It's a negative 23 millimeters, negative 28 millimeters. That shows you how far off the axis it is of our origins. Very simply trick to negate these numbers back down to 0, if you ever want to just make it a quick 0, instead of typing in, all you have to do is right-click the little arrows to the right of each number, and it'll automatically take it to 0, no matter what. It's a simple little hidden trick there. Now, one of the other things that we're looking at is kind of the general shape of this object here. So we're going to go back to our Modify tab, which is the second from the left. And here, probably go into Perspective mode, which is P. We're going to try our best. Let's see here. Well, thinking of one way to get this, what we're ideally like to do is get this point right here, right up against that one. And again, we can move it, and it looks like from the top view we did just fine. But if we go to the perspective view, we can see that it actually raised it up a bit because it snapped to that actual piece up there. So what we can do is we can switch our snap. At least we can try. Sometimes this works, sometimes Max doesn't like to do this. We hold down this 3 button up here, and there's different versions of the magnetism of the snap. So in other words, this is 3 is in 3-dimensional, so it'll snap anything in any direction. So if you pull the vertice up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, it'll move in that direction. But if we stick on 2, then theoretically it'll stay on its same plane of where it is. And it will only go around the X and the Y, and we'll ignore it going vertical. So we can still go in there. If we go to T, and we try to grab and snap. See how that doesn't quite do it? Let's try the 2.5 instead. See if that works. And that might do it. That did the trick. The 2.5 gives a little bit more flexibility, and what that does is it allows you to snap to something that is above or below on the z-axis, but it maintains movement only constricted to the XY, so a flat plane. So if we show it in perspective view, we can actually see here in this view what it does. Grab this vertice, and theoretically, yeah, we'll just do it in the top view because that's not behaving right. There we go. So we know that it's basically the same width as that hexagon. And now we've got enough that we could probably try to give an array tool a shot. The array tool, believe it or not, it's up in the tools in your main menu up in the upper left-hand corner. It's one of the rare places we're actually going to go for something other than the panel on the right. You go down to array, which is about midway through. Select that. Move this window over to one side so we can actually see what we're doing. Now, one of the things that people using this fail to remember is that there's a preview button. You don't have to commit to this tool's effect up front. You can actually see what it's doing before you actually commit to the execution, if you will, of the command. So click the preview button. Still nothing happens because we haven't told it what it wants to do. In this area right here, it gives us the number of items we want to make copies of. Or how many copies we want to make of the item, I should say. I got it backwards. So if we're going to make a 6-sided, if we're going to array this 6 times, we need 6 count. All right. Up here, you're going to worry about the rest later. But up here, look at the rotate section. We want to click on the right arrow, and because we're going to be rotating this on the z-axis, the axis that you can't see on the screen because it's going to be basically just straight down around that, we're going to use just the z or z number over here. I'm noticing that for some reason Twitch is not popping up the window. Interesting. Basically, Twitch has been programmed to just broadcast my actual window of max and nothing else. So it's not popping up. So forgive me for the fact that I'm not actually going to get to show you this window. But I'm going to click on OK, and you're going to suddenly see everything appear. Yep, see how that is? So it basically just knew that I needed 6 sides, and I typed in 360 degrees because I wanted it all the way around to wrap it. I'm going to make sure I don't have any duplicates, which I don't. So now I've got this little array that's going to be our bottom row of trees. Much simpler. I am using OBS. I had it set to window, I think is the one I picked, window capture, rather than there was like, I think maybe screen up. Hopefully my screen just didn't go black, because I am not seeing anything now. Yeah, I think you're right. I have it on Windows, and I think it needs to be like on maybe screen capture or something like that. Yeah, just went to total black. And there we go. I'll bring it back. I will bring back the sun, just like that. That works. Yeah, there's a lot of different choices. This one seemed to work for now, but yeah, it'll be nice to have that little pop-up to show a little more stuff to it. All right, so now we've got a little bit of the start of what we're going to do, and we're going to just basically just build this thing up. And again, we're just going to bring that tree back in so you can actually see what's going on. You can see where we're going with this thing. And essentially, we're just making layer after layer after layer, and then just changing the pieces as we go up smaller and smaller. Hide that one out of the way. All right, so for now, we need to fill in these gaps right here. And to do that, it's pretty simple just to go in and make copies of these pieces that we already have. And then that way we can just manipulate those to fit in between. So we need to turn our grid points off, because we're not getting any more of the grid. We don't need to snap on any grid. We need to turn this back from 2.5 to 3 so that we can snap it any direction we want. And then we basically just hold down Shift, and we're going to drag this selected object right here. That's going to make a copy of it. And we're going to basically take it from one point here, and for now we can just, actually a better way of doing it, taking the top point and pointing it down there like that. Now, when this pops up, when you do that, you're going to get a prompt that you can't see right now, but I'll quickly explain it. It basically asks you to have 3 different choices of behaviors of this new copy that you just made. You can make it a copy, which makes it independent. In other words, when you make changes to this one specific object, the predecessor, the thing that you copied it from, will be unaffected. If you make it instance, which is what it sets to default, you got to be careful on this, it will copy and it will mimic, the 2 pieces will mimic any changes you make on one, the other one will make. It is beneficial in certain areas, like if you're making a railing or street lights or something like that, and you suddenly want to change the height on everything, you just have to change one street light and the rest of them will come down. I'll show you in the case here. If I go in here and take this one vertex here and move it down, they all move. And that's because all of them were instanced. When I made the array choice, I made them instanced. Now, that's both good and bad depending on what kind of modifications we want to have. But in this regard, I don't want this piece, this new piece, to be an instance. So over here on the right in the panel, there's a button just underneath your selection, your sub-selection pattern, and it will illuminate when you have it selected, and it'll basically say Make Unique is the button if you highlight it. And that basically just turns off the instance from that specific item. The rest of these objects in the scene are still instanced. And you can tell that they're instanced by selecting any object and looking in the Modify panel over here, and you'll see that the letters Edit Poly are in bold-face as opposed to this one, which is not bold-faced. That's bold-faced, that's not bold-faced. Bold-faced means they're instanced. All right. So we're going to try to change this thing. He needs to be angled properly so that he points out in the right direction in that angle. We need to have this thing centered back to 0. So generally what I do is right-click the move, selected move item, and then I tell it to go back to 0. I'm leaving the z-axis though where it's at a -12, and that's because I don't want it to move. I like where its height is, where this point here needs to be the same height here because it's going to be fitting right there. So I don't want the z-axis to be reset because then it'll take it back up to here, and this whole piece, this one here, will be the same spot as the others, and I don't want that. So I want to keep it right there for now. Which is hard to see when it's on top of each other like that. But now what I want to do, what do I want to do? Haha. I basically want to rotate this. And I need to rotate it so that it is, I believe it's 30 degrees. You can find out by turning on this next to our snap tool. There's an angle snap tool. I almost always have this thing turned on by default because I just don't like not having it on there. And what that does is basically it rotates in intervals rather than by 0.1 degree. Like for instance, when I rotate it here, I have 0.0. It goes to the 100th degree, and I don't like that because that's not precise. But if you turn it on, it goes in increments of 5. So that way you know that you've got it exactly where you want to. And sure enough, if you rotate it, and you see right here where I've got it held right there, it says 30 degrees, bingo, you know that you got it right on the money. And that's why it's so important to have it under the 0 axis so that you can just spin it right around. I mean, if you do another 30, which makes it 60, then there puts it right there as well. So, which we don't need to do that because we've got the array tool, the thing that you can't quite see. So the nice thing is when you bring the array tool back up, if you have done the array before, it has the same exact settings that you had previously still implemented. So all you have to do is click on OK, and it will array for you that object exactly the way the previous row did. You don't see it, but there you go. Hit P, and you get down back to perspective. You can actually see what's going on here. And again, I kept these new rows. I made all of them instanced. And the reason is because we're going to be adjusting the size and the shape of these things. And I want them all to be doing the same thing. I don't want to have to do this 6 times. So we're going to go to vertices, hit F3 so we can actually see where we're going. We can actually see inside. And basically, we're just filling in this gap. So for now, we're going to make sure snap is on, S. And we're going to snap the vertice here, down there. Notice that the vertice up here moved a little bit. Sometimes that's just inevitable, but the nice thing is we have places for it to go. We know definitively it's going to go there. We're going to do the same thing for that. Notice how in the background everything is moving in unison along with it. And this is what we wanted to do in the first place, so that we're eliminating the time and need for doing this. However, there is this extra stuff down here. And let's unhide all. And we can see in this, we had those pieces just the same way. We had them all set up like that. But because this is a triangle up here, this piece and this piece need to fuse together to give it that triangle shape. So in order to do so, we're going to use target weld again. We did that earlier. That's when we click the button on, we toggle it on, and then we just go to town by dragging the vertice up to its predecessor next to it. Now we've got that. There's a little bit of a divot here because we've had it set down there. We would like to get it to where it's kind of reminiscent to the one above it. So turn off snaps. This time we're going to have a constraint on there. It's up here on the upper right hand corner. And essentially what that does, it restrains the vertice to the edge so that it only will go up the edges that it's beside. So all these lines are edges, okay? And because of that edge constraint is on, no matter what you do, it's only going to go up one of those 4 lines. It cannot go just straight vertical. You can actually see here by doing that. See how it just goes right up that line. It'll follow it. Now, it's the weird, quirky thing about this is that it will continue, it'll change its trajectory as you move up because the overall polygon changes. So, like, it's going up a certain angle, but because if you let go of it, now it's going up a steeper angle. So it doesn't quite go up the perfect. It has a little bit different of an angle. So when you're moving stuff around, just know that you've got to keep an eye on where you want that to be. But now that's popped out like that, nice and clean. You need to worry about the stuff. So turn off your constraint again up here to none. And we're going to go vertical on this. And that goes up like that to help with the printing. And again, vertical. On this regard, I kind of want it to keep it the same as this bottom here because this is going to be kind of the base of the tree. So we're going to use an align tool, new tool over here. Up in the taskbar, up in the top. And towards the middle, there's an align button right here. When you click it, you can click on something and it will align to wherever you want on the side. You can actually align it to up here, down here, on the right or on the left, or in front or in back. And it helps you basically keep everything in line. It's again a pop-up that you won't see, but you see me pushing buttons around. You can see as I change the orientation of where I want it to go, it will change to the top, to the bottom, to the middle. It just depends on what the origin is. I said I wanted to go to the bottom, so there it is. Now if we go to the front, it's all on the same plane. That bottom part is all on the same. And that's nice and pretty. Alright, now that we have this, we move up. We worry about everything below later because that's where the trunk is going to be and crap like that. So now all we have to do, unlike Saturday where we're going this painful process of moving pieces around and manipulating vertices and whatnot, we basically have our tree ready. And now all we do is just go up it by making copies of it and then just making minor changes as we go. I've got these smaller pieces instanced with themselves. I got the bigger pieces instanced with themselves so that when I make any adjustments on either one of them, all of them will be changed. Now as we go up, we're going to be making them smaller. We're going to manipulate them different. So we don't want anything above this row to be the same as the bottom row. So when we make this, we're going to make a copy of this big bad boy. And when we do that, we want to make it a copy, not an instance, so that it's unique to itself. And again, in this regard, we need to, we basically could have done one of two ways. We could have made the copy there and then rotate that piece so that it fits kind of right here. We can also copy this smaller piece upwards so that it basically, if I go like this, to fit it like that. It just depends on the direction you want to go. Now, honestly, I did that on the front on the second row and moved it around. But to me, there was a little bit, almost too much uniformity. So in that regard, I'm going to, for the simple fact that we're running live tonight, we're just going to make it simple and make a copy this way and do it that way. And we can always change this stuff later. Now, once we have this piece up here, we want to shape this secondary piece, since it's independent, so that it fits into that little slice that we've made from the first row. And in order to do that, we want to get our snaps looking good. Right click on the number 3 up there at the very top where your snap is, so that you can bring on your snap settings. Unless I'm using my grid point, which again, you can't see the pop-up. We'll have to worry about that later. But unless I'm using my grid points, I have what's called endpoint and midpoint selected for my snaps. And what that means is only the endpoints, which is the end of any line, and the middle point, which is right in the middle of it. That's really all I've ever used. I very rarely use anything else. So that when we go to vertice, we want to not go up to here, but down to here on the middle. Do the same thing over here. We're doing to the middle. So we're like that. Giving ourselves enough room so that we can put other pieces up here and not necessarily make this just uniformly where this goes up, because then the tree just really just looks too man-made, and we're trying to keep it as natural as possible. On this, we need to move these vertices a little bit, but we don't want to just start going crazy, because if we look in the middle, it little bit off-centered, and we're going to change the uniformity eventually, but for now we're going to keep it as symmetrical as we can, because again, we're using the array tool and we need to keep it uniform so all the pieces will fit together when they're spun around in a circle. So in this regard, we will probably need to use our constraint again. That's up here on the right. We used that earlier. It's edge, and that forces the vertices to go up in this regard. And since we have both of these pieces, that's the vertices, is all we need, these two, because we really don't want them to be that sharp. We're going to bring it up a little snugger. We're going to just use the Z, and it's going to make these vertices go straight up. See how one of them goes a little bit too much? We just want to go up a little bit for the first one. Deselect the first one that we don't want to go anymore by holding down Alt, and then dragging over the vertice you don't want. Alternatively, you can hold down Control and select and drag over the vertice you want to select. Alt deselects, Control selects. So we want to deselect that one and move this up a little bit, because we don't want it quite as sharp as the bottom row. And we can always manipulate these as we go, but for now we're going to leave it like that. All right, now, unfortunately, once again, when we moved this thing up and back, we adjusted and affected the anchor point. It's no longer in the origin. How do we do that? Remember, it's over in the Modify panel on the Hierarchy tab there at the top. Affect Pivot Only. And then right-click your Select and Move tool over on the top of the screen. Right-click it to bring up your settings. Again, you'll have a simple little XYZ window that pops up that'll have actual coordinates of where that anchor point, where this piece is located. Right now for me it says negative 2.944 millimeters on the X off, and then Y it's negative 5.1 millimeter. So we'll zero that up, and now we've got it at the 0 origins, and it's easier enough we can array it again. So to do that, under tools, we used this earlier, array, and of course you can't see it, but our settings are still the same as it was before, so we just have to click on OK. It automatically arrays the pieces as we want them, just like that. Just like that. Keep in mind this is going to be for trees. I mean, we're making just basic trees for role-playing tabletop games, for terrain pieces and things like that. For those of you who joined in and have no clue what we're doing here, that's what we're doing. And when it comes to this, these trees do not have to be lifelike. They don't need to be, you don't have to go out and buy or make the trees if you don't want to, if you don't have the means of getting flock and putting it together and making a mess. I personally don't like dealing with that stuff. Not to mention that flock, after a while, I've seen old flock fall apart. This gives you that option to 3D print or make a resin mold for resin casting and things like that. And that may be too much for you as well, but this will be available for sale, both for 3D printing and eventually for resin. So those who just said, screw it, I don't want to do anything, I just want the stupid trees so I can play my game, well, then you can just buy it and we'll ship it to you, and then you'll have something very nice to use. It's one less thing you have to worry about when you're playing the games. So now that we got that set up, we probably don't need the hexagon pattern anymore. And we've kind of made that claim, and we've already started to shrink it down to the next level. So we can delete that, get that out of the way. Let's save this, because some of the veterans watching right now, they're probably screaming that I have gone, what, an hour without saving it. So we go to save. Again, pop-up you don't see it, but it's under this little button right there in the upper left-hand corner. And you just go to save. All right, now what we want to do, we want to manipulate this extra piece in the middle. Oops. Get rid of that. Don't know where that box came in. That was the dimensions of the printer that I originally made, just so I knew that I was printing or modeling within the dimensions of the printer. So on the next floor, we basically do whatever we want. I spread this little piece out on this last one all the way. That may be something you want to go after and do. It's just up to you. It doesn't matter. It just matters that you make some kind of a friendly pattern of some kind. So we'll hide that again. And, you know, we'll put one like right there and then one right there, and just kind of hope for the best and see what happens. So copy this one up. Make sure it's copied, not instanced. And then we're going to rotate it first, which right now it's off axis. So if we move it to the axis, 0 axis, then we have a nice spot there. Doesn't quite fit where we want it, but we've got it at least in that general area. You can move it here and snap it right there. So that's where we're going to be going. That's our direction. All right. Actually, I made a mistake. I'm allowed to make mistakes. All right. Actually, what we need to do, I skipped a step, is to actually do the array tool first. And that's only because right now it's at it needs to be, again, if we rotate this, it needs to be about, in between that little spot right there. Unfortunately, it's in between the 5-degree mark. If we're going to do this, again, we're doing something completely off the grid, so that's why we have an irrational, irregular, I guess is the word, spot right there. It's the one time I will, if you turn off your snap on rotate and you try to eyeball this thing, you may think that you've got a great eye. You may think that is just spot on the money. The problem is, if you zoom in, it ain't on the money. We're looking to get this white line right in the middle of that whole juncture right there, and we're off. And I thought I had it pretty close. You can go in here and zoom in even more if you want. You can go in here and rotate as much as you want. You can type it in if you want to. But it's a pain to get that thing exact, and there's no reason for it. So in that regard, I mean, you can do math. You can figure out what the angle is on each one of these points. But what we're going to do is turn that back to where it is, right? Turn it back there. What we can do is you can actually see what that should be. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it's a 12-sider. You can actually go back to the N-Gon, make it a 12-sider, and turn on your snaps. Right-click to get your grid points up, and you can go in here and you're hoping to snap like that. And the reason is you need to rotate at 15 degrees. I'm actually just making this up as I go because I don't know if this is going to actually work, to be honest with you. Try to scale this thing up to see. Nope, didn't quite work. What we were hoping to do is making the dodecahedron, is it 12? No, decahedron, the 12-sided, this thing. We were hoping to get it to where it would fit right there, and we could actually measure it real quick without having to sit there and do math. You can do all your math all you want. If you like degrees, if you like angles, if you like memorizing, that's fine. But I don't really particularly care about knowing what the angle is between right there. And that would be the number that you would need to type in when you're rotating this piece so that it would fit perfectly at that angle. So we're backtracking. I'm just going to do what we originally were going to do. I'm going to delete that piece. Accept mistakes. Know that you screw up sometimes, and know half the time when you're modeling something, there's a good chance about halfway through you're going to scrap it and start over again because you have a better idea that just works a lot better. So here we go. We're going to take back the original idea. And instead of doing the halfway point like we were, turn on snaps for S. Turn off our constraints up here on a none. Turn off our grid points. Snap these bad boys back to where they should be. Like that. And that just makes it a little bit easier to build this thing up. We just keep moving like that. Makes it a lot easier. If we stick at the hexagonal degree, then it's 30-degree intervals. It's a lot easier to figure it out. And everything snaps in really well. Alright. Next layer. Back to this one. Just going to copy that up there. Look for the top. Go to the hierarchy up here. Again, effect pivot only. Right click on the movement tool. Zero out your axis when it pops up. turn off your effect pivot only. And now you've got the pivot in the center where you want it to be at the origins. It's the important part. Go back to your modifier tab right up here. Vertices, vertex. And this time, we're going to snap. I'm going to try to snap the vertice here to the top. Oops. We can grab it. Grab it. Snap it right like that. Alright, we'll try something else here, because I made them a point here. I came in there and had little pieces. I did like that, though. That was actually kind of nice, the way that looked. I may do that here. Let's do that. Why not? Alright, so with this regard, we are going to target weld these two pieces here and here down to the respective pieces below. Okay? Target weld is over there. You've seen that. You toggle that button on, and you can drag the vertices down so that they're like that. Now, in order to get the kind of diamond-ish triangle extra where this comes down a little bit, in order to do that, we have to use the cut tool. We have to make segments in this piece that wasn't already. We can even make it easier for you. We can isolate this thing. I just did that by right-clicking anywhere on the screen, going to isolate section. That, again, you won't see it, but it's a pop-up menu that comes up if you right-click. And isolate section will eliminate everything. It'll temporarily hide everything, so it's easier to see things. It's great when it's when you have a very complicated scene and you want to just work on something. This is a very quick and easy thing because you can just right-click and go to in isolate, and it'll turn it right back on to everything else. But on here, we want to cut. So over on the right, again, doesn't matter if we're on vertex, polygon, edge. We just go to cut. Make sure our snap is on, because we're going to snap in the middle, and basically we're going to cut this piece up here in half, if I can get there. Sometimes the cut tool does not want to work on that. There we go. There we go. Just got to keep at it. Here's the cut. And then because we're cutting here, you usually don't like to make cuts to where the vertices here and here are at a T-section like that. If they're at an angle, if it's kind of like a triangle angle where those, instead of it being kind of a T-section, it's going down at angles like this and this, then that's not as bad. But these T-sections, it doesn't really work well because you've got a polygon here, a polygon here, and then a polygon that goes straight across between the two, and it's attaching both of them just by their edge. And the way in 3D modeling really works well, it works better when you have these nice intersections like this. So in order to do that, we're going to just basically cut to the nearest vertice. And since this is such a steep angle, this is where the line is already, the next option is over here. It's irrelevant, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. It's irrelevant that we just made a cut right there. It will not have anything to do, any effect of the actual object itself. When we look at it from an angle, there's no difference. When we hit F4, it actually goes away, and you don't even know it's there. All you can see is the vertices. So we're only doing this for this particular piece up here. Very simple cheat. You just select the polygon sub-object, select the two pieces there and there, delete it. And that way we've got a nice little, I don't know, star showing display. That's it. That's all we need. We can right-click, go to in isolate mode, and that brings up everything back again. We can see that it's that little piece there. We're hoping that it's going to have a little foundation for us. because this piece here is going to be mirrored over to there, so it's going to make this little U shape, if you will, once we array it, and it'll allow us to easily anchor another piece of the pie, and we just keep working our way up. So deselect the poly, make sure our piece is at the origin, which it is. We already did that. Now we can go up to array, use the exact same coordinates that we've always used. The 360 6 times works every time. We don't have to ever change that at all. And now we've got the next row ready to go. Kind of looks like the bottom of a skirt or something like that from some very evil gothic dress. But now we've got these little U sections that we were talking about a second ago, and that does really well for another unique piece. We can reshape it, and that's the nice thing about these new pieces, is that they're different shaped, so that when we copy, let's say this piece here, actually, you know what? Let's not copy those pieces because it's a triangle. We want something that actually fits this space, which is actually these pieces here fit that space a lot better. So we're going to, very simply, move it on up to the east side, right up here, and snap it. It's at the general height, but it's not quite where we want it, but it's close. We need to rotate it over here. But again, we're not oriented quick enough, so we need to go to Hierarchy, Effect Pivot, right-click the Move tool, zero everything back to 0, turn off the effect. Now we've got it back to 0, and we know from our science and math experiment earlier that 30 degrees is universal for hexagonal. So all we need to do is just rotate this thing 30 degrees, bang, 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 bang. And it should be, if we do it correctly, we're going to hit P and go to perspective, and it should be right where we want it, right in the middle of that stuff. And it is. It's not on it, but it's oriented perfectly above the other piece now. See where that is? Excellent. And now from here, since we've got it already oriented, now it's irrelevant. We can do whatever we want with the vertices. We can reshape this piece all we want as long as it stays oriented in the way it is now, which is in that direction, pointed that way, in a 30-degree angle. So now we just go back to our Modify tab, go back to Vertex. If I can get to it. Oops, I accidentally clicked on undo, apparently. Go back. Well, what did it do? Sometimes I got too klutzy and I just rotated it back 30 degrees. I'll be dang. It just happens sometimes. All right, now we're going to go there. Go to our vertices, make sure we have our Move tool, which is W for a shortcut for all those taking notes. And we're going to snap tool these pieces where they should be. Down to there. Down. Oops. Control C is your friend. It is your undo tool. And it will do wonders for you. Something like that. And it's a different shape than the other ones, kind of. It's got some reminiscence to the bottom row, but it has a different conformity, so we're hoping that once we turn on the Turbo Smooth, it'll show different. Let's bring this in just a tad bit. We turn Snap off, turn Constraint Edge on. Hold down the Z and bring it up a little bit. Not too much, just enough to have some interesting shape to it. I'm going to leave this other piece up here, up there. And sometimes I would bring it down, you know, maybe like that to keep it in the same area as the others. But again, we're looking for uniqueness on every row. So by doing this, you're breaking up that unity, even though we're keeping it unified in symmetry. Each row is not going to have uniformity, and that's important. We've already got this thing centered. We can array it now. We're making our way up, getting smaller. The hole is definitely smaller than it was in the bottom. You can see like that. We're getting close to the top. We can even cheat a little bit. And to do so, what we can do is move to the top view, go to vertex, and since these are all instanced, this specific space, we can go in there and actually turn off our constraints, or that will happen. Go inward, and now we've made the thing even smaller. And if we do that, we might want to turn on edge and bring it down just a tad bit, but we need to make sure that it goes down the center, something like that. Again, it doesn't really matter. We're making this up as we go, but isn't it pretty? All right, let's finish this thing up. I like this little triangle one, this little diamond rather, down here, so let's bring that thing up. You're called up. Oops. We want to, let's see, do I want it up there? Yeah, we'll just bring it up there, I guess. I kind of want to bring it up a little bit higher. So let's grab the bottom vertex. And we're trying to snap it about midway up. You'll see that little green thing, but you're trying to snap it to this piece. And you'll see that when you hold it down, it'll kind of come out. It doesn't look like it's snapping, but you'll know it when there it goes, like that. All right. Now we're going to have to rotate this over to this section here, which should be 30 degrees. And then from there, just seal this bad boy off. Let's reschedule. Let's recenter this again. Effect pivot only. You like how it's just repetition? Nope, neither do I. But, oops, I clicked on the wrong button. But this allows people, I mean, this is how you're going to learn. I mean, using these similar buttons over and over again, it's the only way you can really pick up on this software. I mean, there's literally hundreds of thousands of features in this program. And 3D Studio Max is what I was using. 2017 is the version year, if anybody cares. And it's complicated. I mean, this thing takes years to learn, and theoretically, if you wanted to learn it inside and out. So doing these simple mechanics over and over again, it's really kind of an easy way of doing it. And it also makes it so that it's the process is quicker. At least for me it is. All right, what do we say? 30 degrees. So we're going to rotate it 30 degrees, which should be right there. We're off, but it doesn't matter because we're just going to move the vertices. We just have to get the orientation right. So go back to vertices. Make sure your snap is on with S. Get a little closer, which was Big Red, I think, commercial. And we're going to snap all these pieces to where they need to be. I did not see over there, so I'm just going to rotate over there and see that. Something like that. Now these pieces, you get kind of lucky on this. When you've got a piece like this and it's oriented on one of the axes, and you can see that this whole line that I've got selected here is on the y-axis. And that works out great because then you can move these vertices without using the constraint edge that we've been using to manipulate the shapes. If you did it over in one of the angles, it's still these axis controls that you pull on to move things around are still going to be on the X and Y axis. It's the 90-degree angles. But if you go over here and select this object and go to vertices, even though you're selecting the same two vertices in that angle, the X and Y axis still shows in the view that you're looking at X and Y, a 90-degree angle. There are some ways you can change that orientation so that it matches the angle of your object, but it's much easier just to use the constraint, unless you have this situation here where you can just go to vertices and do whatever you want by moving it up like that, just like that. I don't like that being so far out there because, again, when you go up a tree, they usually are bigger at the bottom, which we'll edit here a little bit, and then they go smaller as you get higher up. So things sticking out like that's way too much. So just bring that back in a little bit. It's a little stumpy now. We'll call it stumpy. All right. And make sure that we're oriented on the right origin, which is right here. That way we can go to Tools and Array and click on OK. And it automatically makes our next row of pretty little things. And again, we're getting a little smaller and a little smaller. Not much more left, and we'll seal off the top, and then we'll be done with our tree as far as our general shape. And then we'll start manipulating the various points and things like that, so we can get a little bit of difference in the varying lengths of branches. And then we'll throw on Turbo Smooth. For fun, we'll throw on Turbo Smooth now just to show you what it's all about. So once we get all these done, it's all prickly right now, so obviously it's not ready to be a model. It may be printed. So we've got Turbo Smooth. I've got it set up as one of these buttons up here because I use it all the time. But it is hidden in this modifier list just directly above it. If you click on that, this gives you the list of all the hidden modifiers that can be added to an object that does all kinds of things. Anywhere from skewing objects to one side to adding symmetry, where it makes a book image of the object, to cutting it. It does tons of these things. And this, unfortunately, the modifier list is excessive enough where it can be overwhelming on the number of things. And unfortunately, you can't see the pop-up. We will fix that by next week. And yes, I have ordered pizza. It will be here in exactly 45 minutes when I finish this stream. And we'll go over all those modifier lists in another day, but for today, all we're going to do is put on Turbo Smooth. See how there was these holes that have appeared because we've only added Turbo Smooth to one of the objects, not the whole object itself. Remember when I was saying earlier where if you don't weld vertices together, you'll make holes? Well, that's basically what it just did. Because these, if I turn off Turbo Smooth, these vertices right here in this little intersection are not welded together, and as a result, it does not work that well. So we'll get to that here in a second, but let's get this tree finished. We've got this looking up here, so we need to just basically come in with the last ones. Let's see what will look good. I don't think this will work very well because I really want to get this last piece to seal off. So really we just need kind of a oh yeah, no kidding. The button will order pizza. It's gotta be it. There's so many different ways you can actually order pizza now. Very convenient. I should have a one button order pizza as much as I get Domino's. We're gonna bring, I'm thinking we're gonna bring this piece up. And no, not really. We want that diamond one. That's the one. We'll take this diamond one from down here. And again, you don't have to. You can just do whatever you want because it's pretty simple. But this one worked really convenient to do that. So we're going to do this piece here. Reorient your axis points. Now we're going to go in and change the shape of this thing to fit our final piece here, which is right there, right there. And because we're going to actually put this piece here is going to be the peak, because we've gone up enough. I mean, we can keep going as much as you want. You can shrink this down. You can add more layers to this. You can make it as colossal as you wanted. But for the fact that it's going to be a pine tree and it's only going to be just barely big enough to go over your average mini, it doesn't have to be that big. So we need to basically have this little red dot that I've got, this vertex here. It needs to be at the origin, because that's going to be at the very peak of the tree. So to very simply do that, we right click the move tool, and just like we've been doing with our anchor points, we zero it in like that. And now we've got the ending point. Again, we can move this up afterwards later. That's where it needs to be for now. It might help out a little bit to make this thing a little bit more presentable if we push this down a little bit. So let's go to constraint edge. Let's see if we can't manipulate this just a tad bit. Nope, I lied to you. Take off constraint add. Don't have constraint on, actually, because we're just going Z-axis, go straight down like that. Yeah, that works a little bit better. And if you want to, I guess you could put constraint on there and then bring it up a little bit more. Oops, went up the wrong pipe. Went up that way. Now turn it off. Use the Z to pop down, something like that. Really doesn't matter. No one's going to really be paying attention to it. They're going to be taking it in as a whole. So that's what matters. I do want to bring this in a little bit with constraint on, because it's a little too finicky. It stretches out way too much. Something like that. Maybe a little bit more. Something like there. And now we can go ahead and check. It's already zeroed axis because we put the vertex there, and it's automatically going to stay there for it. So now we're ready to go for the last tool. The last time we can array it. Bada bing, bada boom. We have our tree. Much quicker. Did that in an hour and 22 minutes as opposed to the last Saturday when we were working on and didn't even get through 3 hours, couldn't even get it done. And that's what I'm talking about, is that even when you're working in 3D Studio Max or any other 3D program, you're always going to have moments of eureka where you're halfway through a project and you're thinking, okay, I'm struggling with this. I'm putting too much effort into it and I'm not getting anywhere. It's when you save that file, close it down, and reboot it, start back over again, take it from a different approach, look at it a different way, and see if you can't get a little bit more simplified like this, where you're not spending so much time on all the details and worry about that later. So now that we've got this on, it's still different. It's just a bunch of pieces, though. It's still loose. It's not actually a solid tree. You can actually move these pieces out of the way, and they're like that. So we need to make this one piece. We're going to have to weld all the vertices together so it is one piece. And we have to make the pieces, first of all, unique before we can attach them to each other. Remember, each one of these shapes is instanced with each other on the same floor. So there's a script that you can actually get that you can paste in there, and it will make everything unique. But in this case, basically, if you go in, let's see here. If I can type in, you can actually go in here and select everything. And then there's a modifier, excuse me, because at least there was a modifier. If I can find it. Well, it was here at one point, and it literally made everything unique. And make unique is not there anymore. Now that's one of the things that I've been using 2015, I think, for a while now. And finding stuff here sometimes is just point to it, children. The one you see it. If you see it, point to it. Okay, I know it's a modifier though. Modifier panel. You can right click and see. Can I right click this? Let's see, you can do it. Well, you can always just go and right click it and do it itself. I mean, I hate to do that, but because there's an awful lot of them. I don't want to go through all these because that will take forever. That's kind of an interesting thing that it's changed since 2017 or since 15. They used to have a way that you can right click. There's make reference, but not. Oh, it is right there. Okay. All right. So is there a way you can do edit, right click, make unique? There we go. Okay. All right. So they made it a little bit different than it used to be. What you can do, you can right click basically. I'm going to delete that real quick. You can select everything here, and you can apply an edit poly modifier to all of it. Basically, because if you right click right here with it all selected, it's grayed out. Well, you can't see it, but there's a menu that pops up when you right click right there, and it says make unique. And you add edit poly, which is that button. It's a modifier. Then when you right click on it, you click on make unique. It pops up, says, do you want to make selected items unique with respect to each other? You click yes. And they're all unique now. It still has the uniqueness on the underside of it. You can see right there. But the nice thing is now I should be able to attach everything together because it's all by itself. So down in the panel, down here, you'll see that there's an actual attach button down here. It's underneath create. But in this case, we don't want to click the attach button. We want to click the box next to it, this little black box to the right of it. And that'll bring up the attached list. And it's essentially going to list every object you have in the scene, because each object has its own name. Generically, it's going to be whatever you use to begin with. Box is what we built to begin with. We used a box, and that's what they're all named as. And it pops up, I'll describe it to you. There's basically an attached list of, looks like 46 boxes, or in fact, actually 45 boxes that are in this scene right here. And you basically can go in here and select all of them and click attached. And you'll see here in a second on your screen that you'll see that it's all white now. All the lines pop up and illuminate. That means it's all one piece. You can test it out by going to poly, click on any piece you want, doesn't matter what, and move it. And yeah, it's still separated, but you can click on different polys of the same object. That means that it's all one object now. Now, you did see me move and pull away a poly just a second ago. That means that the vertices are not welded. Just because they're attached doesn't mean they're essentially a solid piece. All they're basically doing is being held together by magic. And that's what it all does. Now you have to actually weld the vertices. Generally speaking, you can actually go to vertice, select every single vertice in this on your object by dragging over it, and you can click on weld. And it should weld every single vertice that is next to each other. Sometimes it gets crazy if you have multiple vertices really close together. And by that I mean not these two vertices on top of each other, but let's say this vertice right here was moved over and was about there in proximity to this one. And you, even though you didn't want it to be welded because it's within the general threshold, Max sometimes takes that vertice and brings it into it and welds them two together. In order to prevent this, when you're going over to weld, which is over here in your panel, over here, there's a weld button right here. Don't click the actual weld button. I very rarely do. Sometimes it works, but hardly ever. I usually click the settings button to the right of it. It's that little box there. And that brings up this little menu that you unfortunately can't see, but again, you'll see it next time. And essentially, you can adjust the threshold. In other words, the distance from each vertice of how far you want those vertices to reach out and weld with its neighboring vertice so that it becomes one. So you can crank it up as much as you want. With a high threshold, it will go all over, and you can essentially get all of these vertices in your screen right now to weld itself into one if you crank the threshold high enough. But you want to keep it down low. It's a measurement, and I have it at 0.1 millimeters, so nothing farther than 0.1 millimeter from each vertice will be welded. So it'll ignore all those other vertices that are, several millimeters away from each other. And if you keep your eye right here in the right, you'll see 288 vertices are selected right now. That's how many we have in our scene. When I click on the check mark on the menu, which you can't see right now, that number hopefully should decrease. It won't increase in half, but it'll decrease by probably, I'd say at least a quarter, maybe more. But it will decrease, so keep an eye on it. And now it is 157. So we know that we've welded everything in this scene that we needed to. We still need to take a look at it, make sure there's no crazy vertices that moved out of the way and they don't look anything wrong. And now we know we can test this by going back to polys, grab one of those spaces in between of these two pieces, and when we move it, it'll bring all of the other surrounding pieces around. And that what tells you you're all good to go. All the pieces are welded. Hit Control Z to go back. We have an actual tree. Yes, I'm overdue to save. So we're going to go up here. There's also a save button right up here in the way upper left-hand corner. Looks like a little disc. You just click on that. You save it. All right. Now, just to make it look good, we're going to see how this thing is going to initially look before we do any kind of further manipulation. We're going to turn on Turbo Smooth again. And this starts off with the low iterations, but we can turn on iterations, which multiplies the number of polygons that's going to be in this thing. And the more you add to it, the smoother your model is going to be. It defaults to 1, so it doesn't kill your computer off the bat. And again, if you you type in like 500 in this thing, your computer will die. Your max will lock up because it'll be locked into a calculation too high for it to handle. You'll run out of memory and it will crash on you. Give it a shot if you'd like to, but I don't. You do in increments of 1, and I have never gone up, I think, above 4, I think. You really just don't need to at that point. At 3, I hit F4 just to see. And it may actually go up to 4 this time. It's not that big of a model, so there's not that many faces to begin with, and not many polygons to begin with, so you can actually get away with multiplying it, because if you only have 2 to start out with and you multiply to 6 or 8, you don't have that many. We don't have that many in that scene, so we can get away with it. Now, right now, it can get away with kind of a tree if if you're holding it back like that. It'll be doable, but in my opinion, it's not good enough. It's too symmetrical, like we were talking earlier. We had symmetry to build it, but now we can do asymmetrical to make it look more natural. There's also an issue that I have. There's a little bit too much of gap down here, a little bit too much of gap right there. And we need to pull out some of these branches a little bit more. It's also too smooth. And we can add a little bit of noise to the surface in a bit and make it all bumpy so it looks like it's little prickly needles sticking out, which will be the final thing we do before we call this good. So for right now, let's turn off Turbo Smooth because we don't need it, even though it's pretty. And we're going to make this a little bit easier first. There's a list of these edible polys and boxes. We're at a point now where we cannot really go backwards down to these. We could actually, in the past, click on some of these and you could actually manipulate, go back in time, if you will, and adjust things in the past. But we can't go there now because we've attached all the pieces together. So what we do is right click, go to collapse all, and it'll collapse it down to an edible poly. And that way we just have one simple edible face here to easily select it. Don't have to worry about too much else. All right, first thing we need to do, get these things proportioned a little bit better. I mean, it kind of looks like it's a decent overall shape, but we just need to get it to fit a little bit better. So we're going to use a difference between a move tool and the scale tool, and that's all we'll use. We're not going to use constraint. We're not going to worry about keeping the vertices on any proportion because, again, now we're looking for a little bit of randomness. So we're going to shrink, we're going to move the pieces down just a tad bit so that there's less gap between layer 1, layer 2. And we're going to do the same thing for this upper one. We're going to select it just underneath this 3 vertices right there because we don't want to move those. We just want to move these pieces for now until they get up into proximity area of those 3. And now we go in there and drag select to include them. And you can move them up that way as well. Okay? Now, one of the things I was talking about earlier is that the branches need to go smaller as they get up further up to the top. You can clearly see this middle row here is just way too outside. So this is where the scaling comes in. We can go to top view and kind of see it doesn't really look like it's too out of the ordinary, but if you look at the row below it, yeah, it definitely, this is the row that we've got it selected, and this is the one below it. It's almost exact same size. So we're going to use the scale tool and bring these in just a tad bit, just like that. It's better to use from the top view so that you can keep it universal. We check ourselves on the mirror and pushing F for the front. P to go to perspective view. We can deselect by just left clicking outside the box. And that's starting to get a little bit better where that's more uniformed. We can test it out by going to Turbo Smooth, cranking up to 4. Alternatively, you can actually leave the Turbo Smooth modifier on in this hierarchy here. You can actually click the eyeball. There's an eyeball to the left of Turbo Smooth, and that actually toggles it on and off. And if you turn it off, you can keep working on it by clicking the edible poly below it, make the changes, then click on Turbo Smooth, turn it back on with the little eyeball. You can do it that way, or you can delete it and just add it again. It's up to you. But that's getting a little bit closer to what we're needing. But again, it's not quite as cone shaped, especially in the middle. I'd like to have a little bit more definition in the branches. So in order to do the definition, we'll go back down here. And instead of using this bottom poly, I'm going to add another edible poly modifier to it. And what this does is it's essentially kind of a save feature. If you click on edible poly just directly above it, it adds another one to it. And what that happens is that I can do things like this. I can move this thing around like that. And if I turn off the edit poly, just like the Turbo Smooth, it'll revert back down to this one, the one below it. So it allows me to do work. Now, let's say I have this and I just don't like it anymore. Instead of resaving or reloading a program, you can delete the actual modifier. It returns it back to its previous state from the editable poly below it, and that way you can continue working on it and move on that way. So it's a feature that people like to use, like we did last time. Some of us really like to add dozens of these editable polys, and they're in various stages, and that way we can backtrack without going too far back. If we've worked 3 hours on a project and we really need to go back because we've just screwed it up too far, we can double back it and not have to go find a save file where it's, you know, as close as it is. So we're going to add another one, and we are going to make these separations a little more defined, these branches. So right now it kind of smoothly, if I turn this off, you can kind of see this piece here just kind of very smoothly goes down to there. There's not much of a definition between the two separating. So basically, one way you can do it, and again, this is why we make this editable poly, because we don't know just how quiet it's going to be. We kind of experiment. So we're going to grab this one, and that one. We're going to try this out just on this one, see how it looks, and then if we like it, we're going to do it with the rest of them. We're going to go over here and go to the extrude button, but we're going to be the settings extrude button, not just the extrude button. And it pops up with two options. One separates like this, and basically it's split. It takes the one edge, splits them. And then the other option in that same extrude makes this thing go, the middle one go vertical, up and down, like that. And if you go in and make it go down, like that, and then close, we want to close off the gap just a tad bit. Now that we have this little gap here, this little gash around here, we turn off editable poly, turn on Turbo Smooth, and we see that there is more of a definition now separating between the branches, which is kind of what we want in a sense, because again, the branches aren't one big piece. This isn't a melted tree. This is an actual tree with individual branches, and they just happen to be rubbing against each other. Now, I don't really like the intensity or the softness of that, so we can go back here. Let's delete that one, add the editable poly back. And instead of doing it so small of a narrow gap, we're going to make it a little bit bigger and a little bit deeper. Turbo Smooth, because it smooths out so much, you can exaggerate a bit more. We're going to try this big a piece and that deep. That may be too much, but we're going to try it out anyway. Turn on Turbo Smooth, and that gets a little bit better. I mean, that's more exactly what we're looking for. And once we do it to all of them, it'll show exactly what you're needing. Now here's the trick. Here's the catch. If you're going to be doing this extrude thing, and you're going to be splitting edges, let me turn off Turbo Smooth. You need to do them all together. Don't do them one at a time. Don't do one branch and extrude and everything, because it will start making faces where you don't want them to be. So you want to basically, I mean, we can almost go in there and select everything. But we don't want all the edges. We want just the edges that surround each branch. So these pieces in between, we really don't want those. We can actually go into wireframe. That might be a little bit more complicated to see, so let's keep it solid. But we're basically going to hold down Alt, and we're going to start at the bottom here, and we're just going to deselect whatever's in the shapes. We're going to leave the borders around selected. because we want them to split. We're just holding down Alt and dragging over the pieces like that. For the bottom piece, we actually want the bottom piece, this section here, to be gone, because there is no piece below it, so there's no need to separate anything down here. There's no need to split these edges. It's just the pieces that are between the branches. One of the things to keep in mind, if you're holding it like this and you're trying to deselect by dragging, you might accidentally deselect stuff on the other side. It does not know, unless you have it turned on over here with ignore backfacing, to ignore the backfacing. And even when that's turned on, half the time I'll do this, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I just like being safe and just pointing the camera down a little bit, and that way I know. So, very quickly here. Deselect these. On the next row, let's see, we want these sections right here, because we want that whole thing to be a branch. So we want just that, like that. But keeping this separate, keeping them, you got to keep them separated. You know I was coming with that. Deselect there, 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 and around the mulberry bush. Here we go. And then the last couple of floors, we want just this area right there. Sometimes I actually will come in from the inside. I don't have my Space Pilot turned on tonight. That's my little controller that lets me navigate, so I'm having to use keyboard controls, which are really clunky. So I'm just gonna try my best to deselect just that area right there. I'm trying to ignore the back, like that. Make sure I still have everything else selected like I should. Yep. Okay. I want this. Right like that. And then the top part. Oops. The sucky thing about this whole doing all this is that if you extrude and it's not like what you want, I mean, you can back up and you can hold Control Z, or you can press Control Z over and over again, and you'll eventually come back to it, to the original state, assuming you have enough undos. But right now, like after doing all that, one little neat trick you can do, you can go up here. There's this little bar here. You can type in edges, and generally, if you deselect everything and go to this drop-down menu, there's absolutely nothing. That's because I completely lied to you. That only applies to objects. So if you have multiple objects in the scene and you want to quickly select all the objects in the scene at one time, you can make a save state right there. You just name it, you know, bunch of balls, and you click on that and automatically it will select all of the balls that you had told it to in the past. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that for sub objects, which really is kind of a bummer that it does that. Let's see what this thing does. Extrude, settings. And then we had that thing cranked up quite a bit. And you can see how they're all uniformly doing this together. And then we bring it in deep. Now it's got to look more like a pine cone, which kind of funny is that it's a pine tree. Click on OK. Cross our fingers, hold on to our butts, turn on Turbo Smooth. See what happens. Definitely has the effect of the differences of the plants, or the branches. I'm not really a big fan of the middle section. It's kind of got some flatness. I mean, if you really look at it hard enough, it looks like a face. But again, we're holding it like that. And for all intents and purposes, it is a tree when it comes down to it. A tree is a tree is a tree. And really, that's all you need to worry about. And from this, we can make several different trees by stretching it, shrinking it down, moving some pieces, and that way they look unique to themselves when you multiply these onto a cluster field. So right now, we're going to save this as a new file, cluster 4. And we're going to call this object right up here, instead of box 30, we're going to call it tree top 01. Right there at the top. That's what it is. We're going to leave the Turbo Smooth on because when we export this as an STL file for printing, we will need to have Turbo Smooth turned on, because that will be a huge part in making sure that the thing will be smooth when it's exported. And we basically are at the point where it's good enough we can leave the Turbo Smooth on. I did mention earlier that there's a way to add noise onto the surface. And there's a couple of different ways of doing it. One of which is that there actually is a noise modifier that you can add to it. But I don't think it's going to actually do exactly what we want. It basically makes everything kind of juddery, but I think it's excessive on what it can actually do. The roughness, we can turn the roughness up to 1. And then basically you can turn on the XYZ, but then either turn up the iteration, and again, looks kind of rough now, but you can turn it down. You can calm it down just a tad bit. If you want that kind of roughness to it. I personally don't like it that way. Alternatively, you can do it the other method, which is a little trickier, but it takes a little bit more prep work, but it can be pretty cool if you can do it. You need to have the Turbo Smooth turned on. Okay? You need to put an edit poly on top of the Turbo Smooth. And again, this is just an area that you'd wait until the very end when you're done with the model and you're just trying to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to go to Polygon as the sub-object, deselect everything. And over here at the very bottom of the last panel is the paint deformation. And basically what this does, it literally allows you to push and pull polygons in groups of polygons around on your object. And there's a program called ZBrush that does this way better, and almost everybody that does character modeling uses ZBrush, but it does the exact same thing as this. So basically what you do is you click on push pull. That starts the object out, and you immediately can see that your cursor changes to this circle with this line coming out of it. And that is basically the size of your brush, of where you're going to be pushing and pulling. It's just going to be just like sculpting clay. The size of your brush is going to be that. The line that sticks out is the direction of where it can actually push. If it's going to go one direction, basically just gives you that kind of a sense of depth and all that. I think by default it pushes, and if you push it one time, it automatically pops out like that. And that's what it is by default. Brush is usually too big. It's usually too strong of a pull. It usually doesn't work the first time, and you've got to go in there and adjust it. So we hit Control Z. We want them to be more like pin cushions. So we want to take the brush size, make it down to 2. Let's see, 2. Yeah, something like that. We don't need to make them literally needles, but we need to make them small enough that there's a little bit of a bump to it. And then the 10 value that was making it super powerful, we need to put it down to like, I don't know, 2 and see what happens. Let's see. Actually, that was the wrong thing. That was the brush value. Sorry. We need to bring the brush strength down to 0.2. That should be enough. And that should hopefully give you just enough power to do that. Kind of bumps it up like that. You don't want to go too far, but basically go in and make like a little pop there. Now, I'm not going to go do that tonight because I've only got 5 more minutes of streaming, but sometimes you've got to go in there and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. It's tedious in certain areas. But just a question is, how much detail do you want to put in your model? How much do you want it to look good, and do you want it to look realistic? You come in here and you can adjust the different heights and strengths and things like that. You can make it smaller and make the brush size like 1. And you can go in here and push up these things at a different height. And eventually you can get it to where, if you're really dedicated, this may kill my computer, so I'm about to save this real quick as a test, because I'm about to put, you can put Turbo Smooth back on top of it. You can put Turbo Smooth on top of Turbo Smooth. After we've made this edible poly, you can actually turn it back on, and it will smooth out your bristles just a tad bit. And if you have got a good enough computer with a good enough memory, you can give it a shot and put it up to, 2 or whatever. And again, if you cover this whole thing, you may have enough of the ridges that you want to do it. It may be worthwhile to you. It may not be. You may like it smooth. But if I can show you real quick, this last thing, and then we'll call it a night. Back to the original drawing that I had of the dwarf house that I'm going to be adding. Bring that in here. I showed you this on Saturday. Assuming I can bring both in. There's going to be a lot of polygons all of a sudden. Hopefully that doesn't just crash the computer, which I think it may have done. If you add too many polys to a scene, the computer doesn't like you. I have, for anybody who gives a crap, I've got about 16 gigs of RAM in this thing. 32 has become now the normal for 3D Studio Max and Maya. It's not out of the question to use that much. Video cards, I got a 1080 in here, and believe it or not, a video card actually does make a huge difference. It allows you to move around and navigate in the scene well, just like in a video game. It has to raster all that. The processor is important only when you're rendering, and that depends on how you're rendering it. I use a program called V-Ray, which attaches to Max. It's a plugin, and it's a renderer that allows me to use my CPU to do the rendering for me. It provides a lot of other things, but that's basically what it's there for. However, NVIDIA, the guys that make you the video cards, hey, it actually loaded. They have a GPU powered renderer now. It's called iRay. I'm not a big fan of it, but it has a tremendous amount of power, though, as it uses your graphics card to render rather than your processor. And if you can put in two Big Daddy 1080s or a Titan, couple of Titans into your computer, if you've got the money for it, you can get those things to do the rendering for you, and it becomes where you're rendering it in minutes instead of hours. For that reason alone, it's worth it. But this is what I was talking about. If you use that push-pull system, you can go in there and make, like, for instance, bark. And from a distance, when you print this off, it's going to look spot on. It's going to look nice barky, and you won't know any difference. And it looks rough here, but when it's printed off and painted and all that, it'll look good. But that's what you can do, essentially, with this, making needles rather than bark, and just make them pointy like that, sticking them out different areas, and it'll look all bristly when it gets done. Will it show up on a printer? It's a good question, because right now we're printing off something that's only about 25 millimeters tall, so only a few inches. I mean, it's a little bit taller than a regular Mini. So you're going to have possibility of the printer not showing up that kind of detail, that level of detail. You'll have to set your rendering settings up extremely high detail, like 0.2, maybe even below that millimeters on your layers. So the layers themselves will be 0.2 millimeters thick, and you'll need to slow the printer down and take your time to print that thing out, to get it to show those things. But again, we may go in there and find that we don't really care about that, and we'll just delete those things and leave it as that. Next Monday, we'll finish this off. We'll get the bark in there. Basically, I'm going to be taking the same tree-like bark look from that dwarf house that I just showed you, and we're applying it to the bottom of this, because that will show up. And then we'll just seal that off and call it good and make a couple copies. And then we'll do, probably next Wednesday, we'll finish it off by doing the actual base that has 3 different holes in it where you can pull out the trees, place a Mini on top of it where it was, so they can show that the person's standing where the tree was, and then kind of manipulate and keep it modular like that. Okay, 8:02. It is 8:02, and that is me to sign off here for the night. I do appreciate those who have geared it in the whole 2 hours. All of you guys, it's nice to have a little bit of an audience and something to talk about. I'm doing this stuff anyway for the Kickstarter and for my company, Simple Poly Tricks. So it's just easier to be online like this, and maybe someone can pick up something and go with it. If you've got any questions, go to Facebook. The link, as Matthew Culver would be saying, it's in the doobly-doo. But it is about to go here. Simple Poly Tricks is that. Leave a note, leave a comment. If it sucked, if it bored you to death, if you got good sleep because of it, let me know. Maybe you have a good nap today because of this. I want to be a part of that. So, but if you have any questions about Macs, things like that, always give me a shout out. Ask about it. I'll do my best to help out. And yeah, see, one person already is enjoying the nap. That's what I'm here for. One way or the other, it's going to be good. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate it. Yes, more pizza's needed. I'm going to go get some more, and I'm going to let you guys have the rest of the week off. And the weekend, next Monday, 6 p.m., we will have improved on the graphics of here so we can actually see the menus. Until then, have a good weekend, and we will see you on the flip side. Peace out.